January 1988. The military situation in southeastern Angola is a tense one. The danger of a large-scale attack by South Africa is there. Fresh Cuban troops and equipment are arriving at various Angolan ports and airports. This is in response to requests from the Luanda government and the leaders of the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola Labor Party. From the points of disembarkment, the Cuban reinforcements continued their trip without wasting a single minute. Those who arrived in Luanda were taken to Malanje and Wambo, where some other units of the southern troops were located. Other groups joined these, coming from the port of Benguela. The increase in men and equipment made it easier to quickly form detachments in Luena province. Meanwhile, in Quito, Guanabal, the South African racists persisted in their artillery harassment of the defense lines established there by the Angolan army troops and 300 Cuban military advisors. At first, the enemy had been able to choose the area of combat, favorable to them, of course. The challenge was accepted because the enemy had to be stopped at all costs. However, at the same time, it was decided to strengthen our contingent and move deep into the southwest front in the direction of the Namibian border. With the arrival of the new Cuban reinforcements and equipment, the correlation of forces on the scene of battle substantially changed. The enemy now would need many more resources in case of an attack. Air and anti-aircraft superiority belonged to the joint forces of Angola, Cuba, and the SWAPO Liberation Movement. In Angola, a situation arose very similar to that of 1975, when South Africa invaded the country, using its superior war resources. Cuba had up to 36,000 men there, in keeping with a mutual agreement adopted by the two governments and parties. This time, the roads and highways extending to the south were once again covered by interminable caravans. The objective now was to reinforce our units. The march was not always easy. Various obstacles had to be surmounted. In Angola, as in the rest of the southern hemisphere, January is a month of constant rains and even big tornadoes. The weather conditions caused a complex situation and complex consequences for this type of activity. Rivers overflowed, bridges collapsed, roads became impassable. This situation favored the activities of the internal enemy of the Angolan people, the bandits of the puppet UNITA. Small groups mined the access routes and roads likely to be used. It was necessary to devote a great deal of time to terrain reconnaissance. This made progress very slow. Once in a while, despite all the security measures taken, accidents occurred because of the mines. This made the line of armored cars and vehicles stop for hours. However, no matter how difficult the obstacles, no matter how unfamiliar the roads, the process of reinforcing the troops and their equipment in the south continued to take its course. The integration of the Cuban, Angolan, and SWAPO forces could be clearly seen by the correspondents who reported the daily events of the war. Together with the Angolan television reporters, we got to know various Angolan Liberation Army units. We visited the positions occupied by the troops of the 6th Military Region, situated in Quito, Guanabal. There we met a group of veterans of battles which had taken place between 1987 and the date of our visit. They had valiantly driven back the racist enemy a number of times. They had fought the UNITA bands for years. The same could not be said for the South African Professional Army or the so-called territorial troops of Namibia. By this time, the Cuban, Angolan, and SWAPO veterans had learned the real weaknesses of the enemy that they were facing quite well as the methods and resources used by them in battle. During this visit, we interviewed Major José Domínguez Batista. We want to make clear that since the beginning of the year, the enemy actions have intensified. Their aim has been to impede the combat activities of our troops. Proof of these actions, of these constant attacks on our positions of defense, is the attack against some of our subordinate units. For example, the actions that the enemy carried out against some of our units of our positions during the 12th and 13th of this month, January, right here in the region we are in now, East Cuito-Cuanabal. As you can see, it is in this region of Cuito-Cuanabal that our soldiers have been in direct confrontation with the regular South African units. The large-scale actions against our units are carried out under the tutelage of the regular South African troops. They pursue direct conflict with our units. We can also state that some enemy units were relieved, we think, by the 201st Namibian Battalion, made up of whites, who were defeated in the fighting that took place on the 12th and 13th of this month. Also, in the units that advanced in transports, the presence of black infantry was noted. However, the M160 and M190 tank crews were white. Evidently, the South African soldiers were there for support, while the black soldiers were the advanced troops right up to the front line. It is not true that the South African troops took Cuito-Cuanabal, because our troops stood firm. And the South Africans knew very well that they weren't going to get to Cuito-Cuanabal. We want to make clear that we are firmly maintaining our positions of defense in line with our ideals, the orders of the Commander-in-Chief. Whatever it costs, we will know how to defend this position, which is, to be precise, the land of Agostinho Neto. Experiences, the knowledge of each chief, of each officer, and of each soldier were constantly exchanged. In brief, the ties of friendship and solidarity that had already existed for decades between the three countries became even stronger. Well, I think the FAPLA comrades have a very high morale. They stand firm in the trenches with us. And we will continue fighting for as long as it takes. The relations between the Angolan and Cuban comrades are good, because we do things as if we were all Cubans or Angolans. For this reason, there are no distinctions made among ourselves. The work the Angolans do is the same as the Cubans as far as all military and defense tasks are concerned. Together we laid the minefields.
A organização em si da defesa. Portanto, nós em conjunto instalamos os campos minados, cujos mesmos têm nos sido.
This was very important because that is where we have been able to take the enemy tanks trapped by the mines, as the comrades have had the opportunity to observe. This is Major Nando, Chief of Staff of the 6th Military Region speaking. At this moment, we are at an artillery position in our military region. Our artillery has carried out big actions.
Uma artilharia que tem realizado grandes ações, que tem dificultado imenso.
At this moment, we are having difficulty with the long-distance enemy artillery.
Apesar que o inimigo emprega esse tipo de peça,
the enemy is using a different type from what they used in 1983 in the 5th Military Region. They have a more sophisticated system at this moment. Their cannons have electronic, computer, and laser beam search systems. Their missiles have an active-reactive system and can reach as far as 46 kilometers. When the enemy first began to use this equipment, it made our army's actions quite difficult to carry out. It's known that UNITA does not have this type of equipment, and the South Africans won't give it to them. These attacks are directed by the South Africans, and what is seen on land is the presence of the 201st Battalion, which operates 23 kilometers from Cuito-Cuanavale. The 201st is made up of Namibian and territorial troops, the majority black and the minority white. That is, with the majority of blacks, they want to mask the real nature of UNITA and try and make the world think, what happened, Comrade Major? That was a G5 missile that fell close to us. Once more, right now, you are witness to the South African presence here. You heard it, you saw it, and the missile almost exploded over our position. Among these soldiers, language was never a big problem. Sometimes you had to use a translator. However, during times of rest, when the troops got together to carry out activities, you could see such a degree of communication that it seemed as if a new language had been born, a common and simple one for relating. In a visit to one of the detachments made up of the three forces fighting the racists, we had the opportunity to talk to Comrade Sam Njomo, president of the SWAPO Liberation Movement.
SWAPO and its military wing, the People's Liberation Army of Namibia plan, has created confidence in the masses of the Namibian people that they are self-liberators. So we have created uncertain situation where the racists, when they move out of the town of Sumer, or Kahanja, Windhoek, are not sure whether they will return to their homes alive. So the struggle will be intensified until all the forces of fascism, colonialism, as represented in our country by the Botha regime, are wiped out and the seizure of power becomes a reality in Namibia. We, in the liberation movement in Africa, are indeed grateful to the leadership of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Cuba, and in particular to Compañero Fidel Castro, for concrete material assistance, political and diplomatic support. We wish to pay special tribute to the Cuban armed forces who traveled thousands and thousands of kilometers to come to Africa to assist practically those of us who are still languishing in the chains of colonialism, imperialism, and foreign domination in this region of Southern Africa. Together with the Cuban comrades, we march, we say, Viva Fidel, Viva the armed forces of the Republic of Cuba. The struggle continues, the victory is certain.
Once Cuba grew powerful forces in its units, it found itself in a position to propose new measures to Angola and the SWAPO. It was necessary to advance toward the border with Namibia. We could expect the worst from the racist enemy. We knew it was preparing for new attacks, either on the same front as before, Cuito-Cuanavale, or in any other zone close to the border between Angola and the occupied Namibia. In Cuba, the Cuban Communist Party and the Revolutionary Army leaders, headed by the Commander-in-Chief, were informed in detail of every event or situation on the scene of battle, as well as the process of reinforcing our troops. If we do not take deep offensive actions because of all the elements we've been considering, which range from logistics to the confounded bridge here in the middle, the possibility that there will be a strong and costly resistance here, the risk that they may group many forces in this place, what are we going to do? Are we going only to be offensive? Get there? The other option would be too defensive. The position that we would have to adopt The border between Angola and Namibia covers an area of approximately 1,000 kilometers. Meanwhile, our units closest to the border were between 250 and 300 kilometers away. To move the old defense lines to essentially occupy the western flank of this extensive area along the border and to establish new units was a task that required a great effort and posed various and inevitable risks. The Angolan government agreed to the Cuban proposal. The SWAPO fighters also supported the proposal. The decision then was not long in coming. As you can see, in the advance toward the Namibian border, our soldiers came up to many rivers, some large, and it was not always possible to cross them. But the advance was not halted. The march might be slow, difficult, but a vehicle or armored car was never left behind. You can see the state of some of the roads in this part of Angola. To a large extent, this situation was caused by the undeclared war the Angolan people have had to face for 12 years. South Africa is especially responsible for this disaster. The international soldier builders of the Youth Labor Army, along with the laborers of the Cuban Construction Workers Union and the Revolutionary Army's engineering troops, engaged in a vast effort to restore roads and bridges as well as build other important military projects. There were times when the tanks and other military vehicles would have been unable to move on had they not had this kind of mechanical raft. Some bridges were not made to support heavy weight, and you had also to take into account the damage caused by the rains, the war, and the lack of maintenance. You can see here an example of the work being carried out. Given the importance of this bridge for communication, it was decided to strengthen parts of its structure. To do this, it was necessary to put 60-centimeter steel beams in the old structure, rebuild and improve the road using cement and 3/4-inch stones. The water current reaches an average speed of 1 and 8 meters per second. The enemy, on the other hand, using this current, can put loads of explosives in the river to try to destroy the bridge. While the laborers and technicians worked, security measures were taken to protect the workers and the bridge. A few days after the repair work started, many of the lighter vehicles could use this bridge. These are the comrades who have borne the brunt of the reinforcement work of this bridge. Reserve Lieutenant Juan Carlos Miranda, structural installer Lucas Ruiz, and the welder Pedro Roble. Their names can be added to the hundreds of other Cuban and Angolan people who have worked together anonymously and with tenacity, not only for the defense of this land, but also for a future of peace that, without doubt, they will win. You now will witness another big project, which today is totally finised. This is an airstrip of great value to the present and future security of the country. Thanks to this airport, Angolan and Cuban planes are closer than ever before to the first line of defense. We are working at this time on what is the runway. We have 1,200 meters already in this layer of yellow soil. The layer of red soil goes on top. We have begun to pour it. A layer of cement is next, and then hot asphalt, 5 centimeters deep. A field inspection was conducted on March 6th. We began work here on March 20th with 200 units of equipment, which the Commander-in-Chief sent us from Cuba, both basic and auxiliary equipment. There are 300 comrades working right now. We are expecting 70 more units that the Commander-in-Chief is going to send around the 25th, as well as 100 more men who should arrive between March 25th and 30th. 6 kilometers of road have been built, 4 to get there and 2 for access. We are trying to build an embankment. 2 stone mills are going to be set up, which the Commander-in-Chief will also send from Cuba. The production of these 2 mills will guarantee the supply of rocks we need for the asphalt. The other critical problem is cement. The Commander-in-Chief is sending us 80,000 cement sacks right now. Another critical point is asphalt, and that will be solved. The real beginning of the construction of the runway was on the 1st. We should take off now at this stage. In addition, there are 3 well drilling units coming from Cuba. And we have this all mapped out. We have maps where the water can be found. This equipment will arrive on the 25th, all of it, either the 25th or the 28th. We will have one of our engineering corps dig the well. As you can see, an airplane could land here without much problem right now. If there were an emergency, it could land here right now. This has been accomplished in a week. This airfield was built under the very noses of the racist enemy in a record time of only 2 months and 10 days. The goal was to lay 100 tons of asphalt daily for a total of 9,000 tons. On June 3rd, the first Angolan and Cuban MiG-23s landed here. The promise had been kept. The South Africans were the ones most surprised when they heard the news. So much so that 2 weeks later, the racist president himself, Peter Botha, declared before the tricameral parliament that the situation in northern Namibia was becoming very dangerous. He went so far as to describe the advance of the Angolans, Cubans, and Swapo fighters as reckless and, in his opinion, unnecessary action. From that moment on, many planes and anti-aircraft forces have been stationed virtually on the border. What a difference if you compare the current situation with the time when the Angolans and Cubans had to fly a minimum of 250 kilometers to be able to intercept the racist enemy in its constant raids in the violation of the airspace of the People's Republic of Angola.
No te pares que te empujo, que esto es pa' hombre camarada. Esta rumba no está sola, todos van a cantar, aunque esté por medio.
During the move south, it was necessary to make a lot of stops. The campaign conditions did not prevent our soldiers from getting the attention they deserved in any instance.
Cualquier noche de trinchera, me vuelvo hacia mi bandera, que en lo más alto se mece. Me vuelvo hacia mi bandera, que en lo más alto se mece. Canta conmigo, varón, y si el enemigo llega, vamos a darle colera, como matero y cañón. Que aquí ya no hay cabrón que rompa lo que está hecho. Angola y Cuba derecho van por senderos hermanos, construyendo con las manos lo que está dentro del pecho, construyendo con las manos lo que está dentro del pecho. Esto es pa' hombre, mi hermano, hasta tu nene, y un infierno pa' que tiene sociedad con el tirano. La muerte no es cosa mía.
The chiefs, as well as the political workers, organized dialogues and briefing sessions for the troops. The officials, sergeants, and soldiers were informed about how operations were to be conducted, of the most important decisions and their antecedents, of the character of the missions to be carried out, as well as the advances won in the military, political, and diplomatic arenas in favor of peace in their region of South Africa. Of course, they were also informed about the important efforts, tasks, errors, and achievements made in Cuba during the time that they were away from home. Military campaign life never limited the prioritized attention which the soldier as a human being deserves. Some units, even though they were traveling to other points further south, had the opportunity to create conditions similar to those that exist in the permanent barracks.
La muerte no es cosa mía, pero si llego a morir, nadie me vaya a sufrir, que morí con alegría, vengo de raza bravía, mambisa y trabajadora, y si me llega la hora, no quiero llanto en mi tumba, que me canten una rumba patriótica y vencedora, que me canten una rumba patriótica y vencedora. Todo lo que traje aquí, que es donde están mis raíces, son los sueños más felices de Fidel y de Martín. Por eso, mi hermano, di, para que nadie se asombre.
I'm in charge of the medical unit of the brigade. We have a complete medical team to guarantee the health of the troops, as well as the health of our Angolan brothers. We have been here among the first. When our chiefs and the government decided to send troops to Cuito, Guanavale, it was necessary for me to come here as an anesthetist. Well, I came to this province right away. However, I did have some difficult moments because they took me off the flight list, made it difficult for me to get here. I continued insisting because I believe that we can say that the boys, the troops here, need to see women, not only as doctors, and that before they came here, it was demonstrated that there is not any great problem about women being here. To the contrary, we are as capable as they are, which has been shown here. We are fulfilling all of our tasks. We have a number of factors which guarantee good medical attention. We have all the medicines necessary for any type of illnesses, a complete medical team, surgery unit, and orthopedists, nurses, ophthalmologists, everything to guarantee adequate health care to the troops.
The troops receive the utmost in medical attention, even though living conditions may have been more or less difficult depending on the circumstances of the unit. From the southern line of defense, including Cuito Cuanavale, to the military hospitals in the city, capable doctors were always available, sufficient means to save or preserve the lives of the combatants. Soldiers, patients in the field hospitals in Angola express satisfaction with health care.
Un dolor de cabeza no respondía a la cloroquina, podía ser otra causa, no fuera paludismo. Pero todo lo demás no tenía problema.
O sea que la salud es buena.
So the health is good. It's good, good. The medicines,
Mucha humedad aquí no.
they're medicines.
Hay medicamentos.
We have serums, bandages, antibiotics, chlorine for the water.
Antibióticos tenemos, cloro para el agua.
No combatant in Angola ever went without food, medical attention, information, or recreation. Another thing, what kind of a diet does the soldier have? Yes, what do they eat? They eat a lot of canned food. Sausage, tuna, sardines. Yeah, what do they like the most? They like meat the most, fresh meat. Yes, I know, fresh. But what about canned? They like canned tuna. It's very good. They like the tuna. That's what they like the most. Do they get that from Cuba? No, it's Angolan. Do they have enough? We tried to give priority to Cuito Cuanavale because of the situation there. Tell me something. What type of vitamin C do they take? I don't know. Wouldn't it be a good idea to send a good-sized shipment of vitamin C there? They tell me that people have colds because it's humid there. Can't you send them a truckload of vitamins? No. There's not much humidity there in Angola because then why do they have colds? Sometimes because of the dust. There's a lot of dust there? Yes? I mentioned that when it rains there, it brings up a column of smoke. The living conditions of the personnel, as well as the security of the troops, are concerns that were brought up at each of the many meetings held in Havana between leaders of the Communist Party of Cuba and the Revolutionary Armed Forces and the highest officers of the Cuban Military Internationalist Contingent in Angola. At the same time that it was decided to advance to the Namibian border via the western flank, reinforcements were also sent to Cuito Cuanavale. A group of men arrived here by land on January 16th to join the 300 advisors that were here since December. More reinforcements arrived later by air. This new contingent was headed by Colonel Ernio Hernandez. Despite the defeat they suffered in January, the enemy was preparing for a new and perhaps even larger attack. On the morning of February 14th, their artillery began a barrage of heavy fire against the positions held by Angolan brigades numbers 59, 25, and 21. Cubans assigned to this line of defense were also part of these brigades. The enemy had a special interest in destroying the bridge over the Cuito River, an objective they finally accomplished. This isolated brigades numbers 59, 25, and 21 in the east. It was very difficult for them to receive supplies or reinforcements of any kind. The attack was imminent by 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The strong action of a company of 8 tanks with joint Angolan-Cuban crews and the support of Angolan infantry helped stop 150 men. This counterattack was led by Lieutenant Colonel Hector Aguilar Perez, who was injured in the mouth and knee. Once he recovered, Lieutenant Colonel Aguilar Perez and 3 other officers who participated in these battles personally briefed Commander-in-Chief Fidel Castro on the events that occurred there. You spread out into the woods. I went into the woods. My idea was to arrive at the brigade's command post to surprise them. My idea was to get them at... The Angolan members were still accompanying you. The Angolan members were still with me. They were riding atop the tanks? No. When I separated from them in combat, they were on foot. I went ahead on the infantry. And you left them? That's what I did. What happened then? How did the battle begin? The battle began with the enemy's infantry. The enemy had their infantry ahead of them. They had the tanks behind them and the infantry in front. I had the tanks ahead of me and the infantry to the rear. When we began the battle, there was a heavy clash with the infantry, only the infantry. The tanks were not there.
se produce un fuerte enfrentamiento con la infantería, solamente con la infantería. Los tanques no estaban. ¿Qué tiraban ustedes?
What weapons were you using? We used an explosive projectile from the tanks. From what distance did you shoot at them? We were shooting them from a short distance, about 115 meters. Did you use the machine guns? Yes, a lot. Was your vehicle also in the woods? Yes. When did you shoot? We used the 14.5 caliber and the 12.7 caliber machine guns. I realized that I made a mistake by having the infantry behind me. I ordered them to go to the front. All this was in the woods. Yes, all this was in the woods. A very thick woods? Yes, a very thick woods, very thick. Were the trees thick? No, the trees were not obstacles. It was thick brushland. Yes, that's what it was. My vehicle, my machine gun was shooting too. When my 14.5 caliber machine gun was exhausted, I picked up my 7 and vice versa. I imagine you caused a lot of casualties among their infantry. We caused many casualties. I estimate that they had more than 100 casualties. In that shootout, yes. How long did this last from the time they hit your first tank? The enemy's infantry destroyed my first tank commander 20 minutes after the battle began. 20 minutes. Yes. During this entire process, I kept thinking that I should move my infantry ahead. I thought about this in the middle of this battle. I called the Angolan captain who headed the infantry and told him to move the infantry ahead. And they went through. Yes, they went through. They behaved well? Fantastically well. I'm very satisfied and very happy with the performance of the Angolan infantry there. Two-hour fighting progressed as follows. First, as I said, the enemy had many rocket launchers. Yes, the infantry had many rocket launchers. The infantry was able to get very close, using the bushes as cover, very close to the tanks, despite the heavy fighting being carried out with the enemy's infantry. Despite this, it was able to get pretty close to the tanks. So out of 6 tanks that were later destroyed, 2 or 3 tanks were destroyed by infantry rocket launchers. And the other ones? The other ones were destroyed by tanks, by enemy tanks. Of course, when the clash took place between tanks, we destroyed, as far as I could see, 5 of their tanks and 3 vehicles. According to the other comrades, because there were places I could not see due to the heavy vegetation, a total of 14 enemy vehicles, that is, some 10 tanks and 4 other vehicles, were destroyed. So that lasted 2 hours. Fighting continued very actively until approximately 7 at night. Until 7, yes, it was dark. Yes, it was very dark. You had 1 tank. I had 1 tank. What about your armored personnel carrier? No, Commander, that was hit 4 times. At what time? At 5 in the afternoon. The engine was hit. The fuel tanks caught fire. When the fuel tanks caught on fire, an enemy vehicle in front began to respond to the machine gun fire over the hatchway. I told the crew not to go out. Then, I was hit a second time. I suppose the enemy thought the ones inside had been killed. After we were hit the second time, outside fire stopped. and I ordered my artillerymen to shoot a burst of machine gun fire with a 14.5 caliber in a circular motion, sweeping everything we had, while the rear of tank was on fire. The rear of the tank was on fire. When I gave the order, I got out. All the comrades got out with any problem. Through the hatchway. 5 comrades got out through the hatchway. The driver and I remained. When the driver and I were about to get out, they reacted and shot again. They launched 2 rockets, and one of them ripped off my driver's arm. It was completely severed. It was totally amputated. I helped him get out. Through the top. I helped him get out through the top because I was alone with him. We were the only ones left. He was left without an arm. From that point on, he did not have his arm. He was dripping blood. Dripping blood. Nothing could be done at that time. All you could do was get him out. All I could do was get him out. Who stopped the bleeding? Well, Commander, we put on a tourniquet. When was that? After you got out? Yes, after we got out. What did you do after you got out? At that time we got out, I had 5 seriously wounded men. Then I ordered Major Sintra and 2 soldiers, Silva. I ordered Major Silva and 2 soldiers to place them behind a very big tree located on a sort of hill. I ordered them to place the wounded behind there so they would be protected. The wounded were taken to that place. I was carrying 4 hand grenades. I took 2 and gave 2 to Major Silva. We took all the wounded men behind the tree. When we finished taking them, the enemy was able to detect this movement from one of their cars and started firing at that place. It launched cannon missiles. That is, it launched with a cannon several fragmentation missiles. These missiles wounded again some of the already wounded men and also seriously wounded the major. So the wounded were left without any protection because he was the one protecting them and he was also wounded. When I noticed this, I told Ciro, I still had contact with him, he was standing at the hatchway, and from here I said, Ciro, I'm going where the wounded are. I'm going to protect the wounded. I'm going where the wounded are. I was wounded when I went from where I was next to Ciro's tank to where the wounded men were. Our tanks and enemy tanks were burning everywhere. Explosions of the missiles inside the tanks were constant. Missiles were on fire. Tanks and missiles were exploding. In the midst of that situation, I thought it was a logical thing for the enemy to carry out a final attack to wipe us out. It was a logical thing. There was no question about it. I prepared my men psychologically for that final enemy attack. I told them, the enemy could attack us at any time with better forces. And I didn't want the enemy to capture anyone alive. I said that I would be the first one to take my own life at the critical moment. A young man who was next to me, a medic, a very young man, I remember, he told me, Lieutenant Colonel, we're not lost. Don't be a pessimist, because we can still get out of here alive. I answered him, we hope so, but we have to be prepared so that the enemy does not capture us alive. He told me, I'm psychologically prepared, Lieutenant Colonel. After you, I will also take my life. I'm not going to be taken alive either. We were completely conditioned so that the enemy could not take anyone prisoner. We were totally conditioned psychologically. Nobody trembled there. This is how we kept fighting, waiting for the enemy's final assault with overwhelmingly stronger forces. until approximately 7:30 to 8 o'clock. Inexplicably, the enemy started to withdraw under our fire. That is, it happened the other way around. We were able to make the enemy withdraw. Despite the fact that we were surrounded, most of our men were wounded, and the tank was in poor shape because it had been hit by missiles 3 times. The enemy withdrew because of our fire and did not launch its final attack, as I expected, since it was the logical thing to expect in that case. Convinced that the enemy had withdrawn, but still not being very confident, since UNITA troops could still remain in the place, I decided to transfer the wounded to a safer place. We practically dragged them, because it was hard for me to walk because I had wounds in my legs, to a lower place with more cover, approximately 150 meters to the left. We stayed there until the pre-dawn hours, when the tank that was looking for wounded comrades, one of our tanks, made contact with us. That is, the comrade, that is the comrade who was leading the tank, and another comrade, I believe it was the artilleryman, came close to the place where we were. They knew we were in that area. They called us, we answered, and contact was made. From that time on, our mission was to save the wounded. We thought some of them were going to die because of the heavy bleeding. We were able to take them on foot to the tank that was located 400 or 500 meters from where we were. I decided to scout the area at 4 in the morning in the direction of the tactical group, deep into our defense territory, in order to determine if there were enemy patrols before we went to the tank. I put myself at the head of this scouting party. There was no other choice. There were no other comrades trained to fulfill that mission. I chose 2 soldiers. I scouted some 4 or 5 kilometers when I realized that there was no danger. That the wounded could be moved without problems. I then gave the order for the tanks to move. Where are you from? I'm from Santa Clara. Who is doing your work there? Who is taking care of those tanks there? Well, Ciro is there. Ciro continues to head the small group of tanks there. He's at the head of the small group of tanks. I'm ready to go back to Quito.